Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Innovation Roots Studio. Today, we are back with an interesting interview with Brian Robertson, who is the co-founder of Holacracy One. After years as a CEO of an award-winning software company, Brian has co-founded Holacracy One to share this innovative framework with other organizations ready to self-manage. He has also written a book called Holacracy, the new management system for a rapidly changing world. Hi, Brian. Really excited to have you with us for this discussion.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. And this is, I think, I can't get away with this discussion without asking you, what is Holacracy and how does it work?
Yeah, it's a big question. So Holacracy is a new framework for organizing work, for organizing a company. And it's easiest to understand actually in contrast to what we're used to, which is management hierarchy, right? Management hierarchy is a framework for how we might break down work and decide who's going to do what, make sure we have alignment in the company, make sure we know who's responsible for, telling whom what, when do we have to check with somebody else, Management hierarchy, we often think of it as, the only way, but of course it's not. It's one way. It's one way to break down work and organize effort. Holacracy is a different way. It's a different framework, and it does not use a hierarchy of managers like management hierarchy does. Right? So it's a different framework. And when I say that, people often immediately make some assumptions that are not actually correct. So let me contrast this. People will often immediately assume that I'm saying there is no structure when I say there are no managers. But that's not actually true. Companies running with Holacracy have more structure, not less, than management hierarchy. If you're not going to have managers directing the action in a hierarchy, you need more structure because people still need to know what to do. They still need to know who to talk to when. They still need to know what are the boundaries of their authority, right? We still need some way to get alignment. And if you're not going to use managers to heroically do it, you need a structure that naturally does it. So there's more structure, not less. And another common misconception is when I say there are no managers, people often assume that there are a lot of meetings and everybody must make decisions by consensus in large groups. And that's also not even remotely true. In fact, we use less consensus and less meetings typically than management hierarchy does. I think that fear often comes because people are sick of all of the meetings where we just talk forever and try to get everyone bought in. And that happens in management hierarchy all the time. And Holacracy, it's quite different. Instead of using meetings to make decisions, we use meetings to get clear who has what authority. Right? Who's responsible for what outside of the meeting? And then you have more autocratic action. So companies running with this Holacracy framework have more people making autocratic decisions outside of meetings without needing to check in with everybody, without needing to get buy-in from everyone, because they know what's theirs to lead and they know the bounds of their authority. So there's a lot more I could say about how it works, how we break down the work. And I'll just say for now, and then I'm sure your other questions will get more into this. Holacracy is a role-based system. So instead of having managers kind of telling others what to do, it defines what are the roles involved in a team and what authority goes with each role. What's the purpose of each role? What are the expectations on each role? And any one person might fill many roles, possibly in many teams, right? I have 20 some roles in my company across like 5 different teams. And each of my roles has a clear purpose, clear expectations, clear power or authority, right? I know the limits on my authority. And Holacracy is a framework for breaking down and clarifying those roles. And instead of a manager doing that work, because frankly, managers, we want them to do that work even in management hierarchy, but often they don't. They just micromanage. It's difficult work. Holacracy uses a team process, so everyone in the team gets involved in breaking down and defining the roles. So that's the very high level overview.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Brian. And since we have spoken about self-managing, I have an interesting question for you. So as per your experiences, how can an entrepreneurial mindset scale in today's environment, and can Holacracy play a good role in it?
Yeah, it's funny. I often get asked about the prerequisites for adopting Holacracy. And sometimes people ask, do you need this entrepreneurial mindset before you can adopt something like Holacracy? Because clearly, if you're going to give people more autonomy and more authority, you want more of an entrepreneurial mindset naturally. But I think they've got the causality backwards in the question. I think people are concerned about this because we see a lot of people without much of an entrepreneurial mindset, or at least not acting from an entrepreneurial mindset in most companies. But I think that's because the environment we're in most of our companies crushes that out of people, right? It's the reason we don't have more entrepreneurial mindset in companies is not because people are fundamentally not there. Uh, Even when people join a company quite entrepreneurial, it often doesn't take long before they've learned that it's difficult to drive change, right? We have learned helplessness in a lot of companies. We have people that realize, it's just too hard to drive change, so they kind of lose whatever entrepreneurial mindset they have. Um, and I think the solution to that is not trying to change people's mindsets. It's trying to change the environment they're in, right? And let the mindset naturally develop. Create an environment where people, where it works, where you can drive change, you can be entrepreneurial, right? Where you can see something that could be improved and have clear paths to actually improve it that don't feel so bureaucratic and crush the spirit out of you, and then leave people to their natural creativity. I mean, look at babies, look at children. They're naturally creative and naturally entrepreneurial. We do not need to train an entrepreneurial mindset into people. We need to create environments that don't stop people's natural expression that's already there from birth. I mean, humans by their nature are creative and entrepreneurial. So yes, is the short answer. I think Holacracy can absolutely help with that. And it helps with that, not by forcing people's mindsets to change, but just by giving people an environment that allows their natural mindset to flourish.
Yeah, that's I think that stands true at many levels, and we have just spoken about driving change, and my next question is around the same. Decision making is very critical to drive change. I want to understand a few tips from you for business leaders to make meaningful decisions that basically drive the change.
Yeah. Um, so one of the things I often offer here, there's a meta level to a specific decision. So any decision you might need to make in your organization, right? Whatever it is, like my company, we do a lot of training. So we have decisions like what countries do we go to do a training in? When do we go to a new one? What venue do we use for our trainings? What design? How many days long are our trainings? These are the kinds of decisions we might need to make in a training business. But the question that often doesn't get asked is the more meta level question of, well, wait a minute, who makes those decisions and within what requirements or what limits, right? And then the meta question, how do we decide those things and change them, right? So often in organizations, I see people at that first line. They're looking at the key business decisions, which is great. We need to make those decisions. We need to decide when do we go to a new country or open a new market for our trainings, and what does our training design look like and all that. But let's not miss the meta question, who makes those decisions? Because if we don't ask that, then we tend to look up a hierarchy. We tend to look to the boss to make all those decisions. And often the boss is overwhelmed, overloaded, and not the best person to make all those decisions. Or we don't know which decisions the boss should make. So we kind of try to make the ones we can, but we keep looking to the leader and we put so much pressure on that person. So let's ask the meta question, who should make these decisions? And let's not get stuck there because the answer to that needs to change, right? Sometimes we define constraints. We realize that, for example, the person who chooses the venue for our trainings, they really need to listen to the needs of the trainer for what's needed in a training room, right? So that's now the meta question is, well, wait, how can we evolve who makes which decisions? And what boundaries or constraints do we have? What responsibility goes with the decision-making power? That's what you need. And whether you do that with Holacracy or something else, or you can do it in a management hierarchy, just make it really clear that the role of a manager is not to just do the first level of make the hard decisions. The role of a manager is to create clarity of who makes which decisions. And then even more, there needs to be a process by which anyone can get involved in saying, hey, we need to update our structure, our decision-making rules and our roles of who makes which decisions. So my first answer is not specifically to how to make better frontline decisions. It's to clarify who makes which and within what bounds, and then how do you even change that? Because if you get those right, you'll naturally have better frontline decisions. You'll have the right people making the right decision, and you'll learn, right? You'll learn how to make better decisions over time. You'll learn things like, hey, our person choosing venues really needs a list of requirements from the trainer, and the trainer needs to develop that list of requirements, right? When you get those kind of things right, because the group can learn together, then the specific decisions get better and better and better. So that's my main lesson. Don't miss the meta level and even the meta process level beyond that.
All right. So, Brian, according to your experiences of working with different people and different organizations, maybe, what are the key ingredients for successful strategic leadership? Because I think that's the most asked thing for the decision makers today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so similar. Again, I come back to so we try to get big strategies right. We're in an era right now of large goals. We try to do moonshots and big things. How do we achieve a big mission? What's the right big strategy? And actually, in many ways, I think that's the wrong question. And what would be a more powerful question? Well, I think a more powerful question is, how do we successfully make smaller decisions, not the right bigger decisions, and then adapt and learn from them so that we course correct constantly and we're getting to the right strategy rather than trying to figure out the right strategy up front? How do we let the right strategy evolve or emerge from the natural way we work together? Right, the natural way we go about executing whatever it is we're executing. We don't get to the right big strategies by getting them right up front most of the time. Sometimes we do, and those successes are giant and they look great, and then everyone thinks, man, how do we get the right giant big strategy? But I think so much more often, learning is more effective than a big strategy, right? Learning is so much more effective than a big strategy. So I think a more interesting question is, how do we learn? How do we course correct? How do we adjust our strategy? And that can't just come from the top, because most of the information we have that we need to learn is coming in a distributed fashion. It's coming from everyone doing their little part. Everyone who touches a customer or a key process, right? Or some key stakeholder in some way, or some internal method that's needed for those things. Everyone doing that is learning something. How do we harvest the learning and feed that into our strategy? How do we let that adjust our strategy? And not just our strategy, but our operations as well, right? There's a great quote from Peter Drucker, famous management thinker Drucker, who says, "Culture eats strategy for lunch." I think that's just a really good point. The culture of your organization, right, is more important than your strategy, because the right culture will naturally tend towards better strategies, and the wrong culture will undermine even the best strategy. And I think that's very true. And I have an addition to his quote. That's a quote of mine, which just adds to it. It says, yes, that's true. Culture eats strategy for lunch. Yes. And structure eats culture for dinner. And what I mean by that is the right organizational structure is even more fundamental, because culture is built on top of that. The wrong power structure will undermine the best cultures, and a really healthy power structure will tend towards people who feel more entrepreneurial, who are learning faster, who are more empowered, right? So my lesson here, if you want the right strategy, you just don't ask the question, how do I get the right strategy? It's the wrong question. Find more powerful questions, more empowering questions. Right? How do I build the culture where the right strategy will emerge? And then even more, how do I build the organizational structure in which people are naturally empowered and will naturally adjust and adapt the strategy, and where that learning can be decentralized or distributed throughout? Holacracy is my answer to that, but it's not the only answer to that. There are lots of possible answers to that. But in all of them, it's much more about the learning and evolution than it is about getting some big right strategy through some ideal strategy process. It's much harder than that, and it's much easier at the same time. Strategy it's too hard to get the right strategy up front in most complex environments. Right? Imagine we did this. This is as a metaphor. Imagine you want your child to have the right strategy in life, right? You want them to really succeed. You want the right strategy. Do you sit your child down when they're 5 and say, okay, let's find the right strategic path for your life? What's the right strategy for you? What purpose should you serve and how should you execute it? Let's lay out a plan, right? It doesn't work. You don't do that. Right? The 5-year-old doesn't know that. For that matter, the 20-year-old doesn't know that. I'm in my mid 40s and I'm still kind of figuring this out. The far more successful path is you teach them how to learn, right? You teach them to experiment, to adapt. You help facilitate a growth mindset. You help them just be open. You help build a healthy system, healthy human, and you trust life will unfold from there. You know, if somebody has a baseline level of health and a growth mindset, they will learn. They'll try things. You know, you send them to a bunch of different whatever hobbies, you get them trying different things, because that's how we learn what works for us, what's natural. We try a lot of things and we adapt, we grow. Let's do that for our companies. Let's stop treating our companies like a machine where we have to design the right path. This is the metaphor we live in today. We live in a machine age metaphor, right? You hear it in our language, you know, we talk about fixing things that are broken. Imagine if you did that to people. You know, what human wants to be fixed and thought of as broken, right? It doesn't work. If I went to my fiance and said, hey, love, clearly there's a problem with you, you know, let me fix you, right? We need to fix this thing that's broken in you. That doesn't go very far, you know, it doesn't get me anywhere. Let's stop looking at our companies as machines to be designed, to be architected, to be fixed. And let's start looking at them as living systems to be nurtured, to be grown. And not even to be grown. Nobody grows a living system from outside. They grow themselves. They're already growing. What we can do is help. We can help catalyze growth. We can look at what's in the way, what's blocking their natural unfolding process, right? And we can work at that level. Right? We can find ways to coach and to mentor. Maybe we can discover. These are the kinds of metaphors and attitudes I think serve us better in our companies today, and will end up getting us to a better strategic implementation of whatever it is we can do in life. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, that's an interesting dimension that you have given to the same. So thank you very much there. Ryan, I have seen you mentioning and maybe talking about social technology at a couple of places.
Yeah.
Can you please share your views about the need for social technology today?
Yeah. So whether we're consciously aware of it or not, our companies are already running on some kind of social technology, some kind of operating system for how we work together. And by social technology, I mean a management technology, you could think of it, a technology for how we break down work, how we make decisions, and how we decide who decides that thing, right? How we break down work and decide who's responsible for what, how we decide who will make which decisions and all that. And this social technology we're most used to is management hierarchy. Management hierarchy is a social technology, a way of structuring an organization. And yet it's one that we rarely consciously choose. We often inherit it, right? Rarely do I see entrepreneurs or business leaders sitting down and saying, how should we structure power in our company, right? Should we vest it all in a CEO and then break it down a hierarchy of managers, right? And rarely is that done. And rarely do we even step back and ask, well, and what's really expected of a manager? We ask what's expected of them in the specific role, right? Like as the leader of our whatever software team, we might ask what's expected of them, but not just in the meta level. Like, what do you expect your managers to do? And without that clarity, we end up with managers that do what they know how to do, which is jump in and save the day. We have a lot of superhero managers. We have a lot of firefighters that are putting out fires and saving the day. And that's actually not what you want a manager doing in a management hierarchy. That's not a very effective use of the social technology management hierarchy. Ideally, what you want managers, what you want in a manager is creating clarity, right? You want a manager that doesn't micromanage, but that instead defines boundaries and says, here's your role, right? Here's what's expected of you. And these are the meta functions we want of a manager. We want a manager that lays out, here are the expectations of every role on the team, and here's the decisions that you have the right to make without talking to anyone else. And here are the limits of that. Here's when you do need to go talk to someone. And more often than not, that person should not be the manager, right? Here's when you need to go talk to this other role on the team. And here's when you don't. And here's when you need to talk to that role. And here's when you do need to talk to me for these things, right? Or here's when you need to bring something to the whole team. This is not what we see in most managers because we don't have the social technology that says, here's the job of a manager. And it's also really hard. And frankly, in most companies, when you get a manager that's really good at that, they get promoted and replaced by a manager who's not that good at that because there's not enough to go around. It's really hard. So then the question becomes, how can we equip our managers, right, with a more useful tool or a technology that helps them do that job well? And ironically, this is really what Holacracy is. People tend to think of it as if it's somehow pushing against management or managers. And it's really not. It's about perfecting management until you no longer need a superhero saving the day anymore. You don't need the manager in the conventional sense. You have a process that managers can rely on so heavily that ultimately they can obsolete even themselves because everyone in the team can get involved in that process. And that is a really effective social technology, one that does the work of management more effectively than a single individual manager can do, right? What you want is a social technology for management. Holacracy is not about throwing out management. It's about doing management so effectively that you no longer need to centralize it in a manager. But that starts by just giving your managers a good social technology or tool that lets them use it. So a social technology might consist of things like a language, a pattern language, we call it. So a language for how do you describe roles? What are the elements that a role has, instead of just looking to a manager to make these things up? Or job descriptions, which are mostly useless. When was the last time you went and looked up something in your job description? They're not that useful because the language is there. So Holacracy defines in its social technology a language. Here's what a role looks like. A role has a name, it has a purpose, it has some accountabilities, which have a specific format to them. So we're giving guidance to our managers. Here's how you can define an accountability to get really clear and concrete what's expected of that person. And a role has what we call domains, or think of it as the property of a role, right? This is what the role controls, what this role owns and controls that no one else should mess with without talking to them, right? So with this language for a role, you can then start adding process around it. Here's Holacracy adds what we call a governance process or a governance meeting, and that's part of this social technology. It's a meeting process where anyone can propose a change to any other role on the team or any policy of the team, right? And there's a defined way of doing that. So now instead of just, managers, good luck, figure out how to create clarity. We're saying, no, managers, here's how you create clarity. Here's a definition of a role. Here's a template. Use this to define the roles on your team. And here's a process so that it's not all on you. And you can use the process too. We're not throwing out the value that you bring. Here's a process you can use to make sure when you're creating clear roles or you're changing roles, you're not accidentally causing harm. And we're going to invite others into that process and give them a voice to say, wait a minute, if we do that, it's going to make my work harder. Let's solve that puzzle. So we're adding a process for how people can update and change the work of roles. And you can use Holacracy's processes, or you can try to create your own, or you can go define or find others. I'm less interested with whether people do Holacracy or not, and I'm more interested in creating more conscious companies where people are choosing what is the social technology, the operating system of our management, right? Because if we don't ask that question, we're going to get a naturally unconscious and often an answer that doesn't serve us well. right? We're going to end up with people just kind of winging it. And that's not usually a very effective way to define structure.
So, Brian, we have just spoken about being conscious and having conscious people. And that brings to my next question as well. What are the biggest challenges for a sustainable future and how it can be addressed today?
Yeah, that's great. Um, oh man, there are so many. It's hard to pull them apart. But I think the easier question is how do you address them? And I think in many ways it's by not trying to address the big questions, but addressing the ones right in front of you. Um, I think we are more effective when we just look at what's immediate, what's stopping you in your life and your work from creating more value, from being of service, from bringing something new and useful into the world. Um, Often, the for me, the path to anything better is much more local. Um, because honestly, the big challenges in your company or the world, how many can you make a meaningful, direct impact on? Often, relatively few. You know, uh, but there's plenty of things you can do to make your little local piece of the world better. And the more we have people acting locally like that, the more we have people consciously driving change in whatever's right in front of them. Um, that leads to big things, and not just that, the mindset that comes from that. What will lead to a more sustainable world? Lead to We have so many global challenges nowadays. What leads to the solutions to those, I think, is not a bunch of people trying to ask what should somebody else do about those giant things. It's a bunch of people saying, what can I do right now in my local world to make the world better, to make something better for someone, to be of more service, to add more love into the world right now, today, to create more, to bring more life into the world. What can I do right now, today? And if we had a world of people that stopped looking to the politicians to create the big solutions, or the big leaders in the business to create the big solutions, right? If we stopped looking outside of ourselves to somebody else and trying to ask what should they do, right? And I'm not saying they shouldn't do things, right? I'm saying everybody can do things. But if we had a world that stopped doing that and instead said, how can I build the world I want to see right now in a way that I can have meaningful change in, right? How can I make my little corner of the world better? And everybody were doing that, right? If we had that level of entrepreneurial empowered action as the norm, instead of people looking for how can they save us, I think that leads to the kind of innovations, the kind of world that we need to thrive amid so many of the current global challenges. We need less people asking what others should do, and we're just saying, what can I do?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for taking out time to answer all the questions in so much detail. With this, we move on to our next segment, which is a rapid fire round. I'll be asking you a couple of questions, and I expect you to be as quick as you can.
Great.
So, what is your biggest fear?
Ooh, biggest fear. The thing that immediately comes up for me, um, fear. um, I am terrified of getting stuck in fear and responding from scarcity, responding from lack, responding from the contracted parts of myself, right? As opposed to responding from the part of me that knows total abundance, and the part of me that is just steeped in complete love for everything and everyone. Um, I am scared of the part of me that responds from fear, the part of me that responds from pain, from trauma, from anything other than pure love and pure abundance.
All right, and what is your best memory? If you can share
My
with
best
us
what?
basically. Best memory for you.
Oh, my best memory. Oh man. Hmm. Yeah, so many, but um, the ones that come up to me, for me most, um, right now, my fiance, I got engaged recently, like not even 6 months ago, to my best friend. We were best friends for years. We never thought it would go that way, and one day we decided in the moment like that to have children together. And we had never been on a date. We had never kissed. We were just the closest friends there were, and we had just listened to a friend of ours talk about what children meant to him and contributing to the future um, through children. And it was so inspiring. And I just looked at her and said, April, I want to have a baby with you. And she said, me too. And and then a few days later, we had our first kiss. And a few days after that, we got engaged. And it was life-changing. And a completely different path into relationship than I've ever had in any of my prior relationships.
That's amazing. Congratulations, Brian, for getting engaged. Who is your favorite author? I know it's complete change of dimension.
Yeah, okay, several come to mind. In the more of a business productivity context, David Allen, author of Getting Things Done, inspired me. And yet it's also, there's something in his work. I jokingly say sometimes when people ask me what my spiritual practice is, I'll say getting things done, because it's a mindfulness practice about how to direct your attention. It's a beautiful practice and so productive. Um, and then the other author that came to mind that I've been just so inspired by so much of his work lately is the spiritual teacher Ram Dass. I really, really love some of what he offers, and it's so simple and almost a reminder of how I want to show up in my life and myself and my world.
All right. Uh, do you have a favorite stationery?
Favorite stationery. Yeah, my favorite stationery is Post-it notes. So simple but so effective.
Absolutely. And what do you do in your spare time? What's your hobby?
Um, so psychedelics. I do a lot of psychedelic journeys, and for all different types, but ayahuasca retreats have been life-changing for me. Other forms of psychedelics as well. Exploring consciousness, I'd say, is my hobby. Psychedelics is really just a tool. It's one tool. It's not just about the medicine itself. You can get there in totally sober states as well, but I'd say my hobby is in interior exploration, exploring what is consciousness, what is my consciousness. How do I dive as deeply as I can into what it is to be a point of consciousness in the world, and what is the texture of consciousness, what's the feel of it, and how do I more intentionally direct that consciousness. So my hobby is all about consciousness exploration, and psychedelics are one of my favorite tools for doing that.
That sounds interesting. And with that, we come to the end of this segment also, and we have discussed a lot of things with you today and had a quick rapid fire to know you better. Now, I would like to conclude with your tip for business leaders to thrive and grow in the VUCA world.
Yeah, so I spent years as a business leader and CEO, many years, focused on how do I shape and structure my company more effectively? How do I get more out of the people and the systems and the processes around me? Years of that work led to Holacracy, which is a framework that helps. And yet, I discovered something more and more along my journey, which is no matter how effective my framework, no matter how much I do that work, the limiting factor is going to be myself. It's always going to be myself. The most powerful thing I can do ultimately is work on myself. And I can find better frameworks to do that work within. And when I want to get more out of others, maybe instead there's a different question I can ask about myself. There's a great quote I love. There was a giant business conference, one of the ones that gets ex-presidents to speak and giant company CEOs, and This was many, actually decades ago now. And the speaker that was rated the best at this conference was actually Mother Teresa, who happened to be speaking down the road. And so the conference organizers discovered that and asked Mother Teresa to come give a talk at this business conference. And so she came and she listened for a while first. A lot of people asking how they could get more out of their people and their systems, and how could they get people to change more, because they're in a world now of so much change and we need people to change with it. And she came up and she gave a very short talk. And she said, I don't know much about business, but I know this. You want to change people. Well, do you know them? And do you love them? Because until you know them and until you love them, you're not going to change them. And then she said, and before you can do that, do you know yourself? And do you love yourself? And I think for me, what I keep coming back to in my business world is, if I want to be more powerful, more effective in business, I also need to be more open-hearted. I need to be more conscious, and I need to be more loving. So how can I work on myself to remove all of the barriers and obstacles, to not act out of that contracted part, the fear, the neediness, the sense that something is wrong? And how can I look at everything going on around me as a beautiful expression? Like, how can I find the awe and the inspiration that we're even where we are, with whatever limits I see in it, and then help it grow from there to its next step? Because I think, like people, businesses don't grow from people driving at them from frustration and anger. I mean, when does that help somebody really grow into their best self? People grow when they're loved exactly as they are. And that's how you can help somebody transform into what's next for them. And I think we can do that for our businesses and for everybody we work with. How do we love them exactly as they are so that we can help them find their next step? So work on yourself is my ultimate lesson.
That's amazing, Brian. Thank you so much. It was lovely having you with us for this discussion, and I'm sure the audience is going to like the kind of discussion we had around holacracy, about leadership, making decisions, making sustainable future. A lot of aspects we have touched upon, and thanks to you for taking out time for that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.